Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. With COVID and the government's response to it, we as a society have had to quickly pivot and adjust to the new normal, or the way things get done. For example, how many of you used online grocery shopping and curbside pickup before 2020? But with the stores in lockdown, fear over contracting the virus, and masking measures in place, many elected not to go into stores at all, and we saw a huge uptick in getting groceries delivered to your car or even your front door. Some of you may have been hesitant to use an app to upload your personal health data, to your phone. But with government edicts forcing QR codes in society, if you wanted access to some places, you had better jump through the hoops or no access for you. Well, what about our privacy? What impact does all of this have on our privacy rights? How does the normalizing of a QR code as your identifier impact your life and your functioning within a society? How will machines or even artificial intelligence dictate our life and choices within in the future, near or far? Well, this may indeed all sound futuristic. Some are sounding, however, the alarm that biodigital convergence is coming, and perhaps sooner than we might think, and that it may not be all that great because it could curtail some of your freedoms and independence. Well, joining us to unpack all of this is Dr. Travis Smith, Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at Concordia University. Professor Smith, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm looking to dive right in, and I think probably top of mind for our viewers is what exactly is biodigital convergence?
Hi, Tanya. Thanks for having me on Counterpoint today. So biodigital convergence is a phrase that I was introduced to specifically on a Policy Horizons Canada page on our Government of Canada website. So not some fringe, kooky, crazy, off in the corners of the internet kind of place, but on a gc.ca website, in which it was discussed about what the future of Canada might look like when we have, either incorporated digital technologies into our biology or incorporated biological matter entities into digital beings or some other kind of merging, the invention of new life forms, the relationship between life and artificial intelligence, and that kind of thing. And so the government has this interesting website on biodigital convergence in the Canadian context, in which it sort of envisions what that might be like for us.
Okay, so some folks would say, well, that's just something put on a website somewhere. But you make a good point. This is on a Government of Canada website. What's the significance with that?
Well, one of the things that made it sort of pop out to me is that it was posted in February 2020, so right in between the time that the virus is first discovered in China and the time that the pandemic is declared all around the world, including Canada. But what's interesting is it's on a sort of speculative policy website in which the government is entertaining different kinds of policy impacts, policy significance, policy alternatives. Who's going to be consulted, which stakeholders, which partners are going to be discussed, what are going to be the social and the economic impacts, how is this going to lead to changes to the kinds of choices that individuals get to make. And so it's put in this policy context it's speculative, it's not laying forth any kind of specific the way it's going to be, but it's sort of conjectural and hypothetical. These are the ways Canadians might start thinking about, way things might start to change pretty soon once we start incorporating biological and digital or those parts of our worlds in a more intimate way.
And of course, as a citizen and now one that works in media, my takeaway from that is, well, if the government's talking about it on such a public forum or putting forward a forum to discuss these ideas, then there might be a policy that might follow down the road, because normally that's sort of how policy develops.
Yeah, we know that they invest in their plans long in advance of putting them out in the public, right? And so by the time they get out to the public, they usually have some sort of plan in mind or some sort of institutions ready to go, or technologies ready to start. It takes a long time to get these things going, and if this is something that they want to do, they're going to have things ready by the time they start really get moving on it.
Okay. Well, we're going to unpack a little bit more, actually a lot more, about what we could see happening in the future and why that matters to you, our viewer, in just a few moments when we return from this commercial break. Welcome back. We're discussing biodigital convergence with Dr. Travis Smith, Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at Concordia University. Dr. Smith, just before commercial break, we were discussing how there's already on a government website, a forum, if you will, or some ideas that were put forward. Nothing's in policy, but just some thoughts put forward about biodigital convergence. So let's discuss some of the concerns. What are your main concerns with this seemingly futuristic biodigital convergence?
Right. First, I was to say, it kind of reminds me of how I know that the Ontario Digital ID program is something that they were working on behind the scenes for a long time before they start, putting it out in public. So when we see that they're talking about things like, how do we incorporate digital technologies inside our own biology? How do we make it so that we send brain messages to artificial intelligences? How is it we receive information from various apps that tell us what decisions we're supposed to make and what kind of rewards or punishments there might be for making the right decisions or going against the advice, especially when it pertains to our health choices, our body. This is highlighted, as well as global impacts are highlighted in this document as well, like what kind of impacts are your decisions going to have on the environment and so forth. And so the scenario that this document suggests that we imagine ourselves as this future being is one where within a short period of time they've had to consult various apps, consult various artificial intelligences that give them directives regarding what sorts of decisions they ought to make regarding the most minute decisions of everyday life, as if everything is something that we should no longer really be responsible for making our own decisions for, but we should be following the really good advice of authoritative technologies and whichever decision makers are behind those.
Well, obviously there are several independence red flags and freedom red flags raised within what you said. But so how would our body, our minds communicate with this AI, this artificial intelligence? Are you suggesting, and because I want to make it very clear for our viewers, that something would be injected into our body, or there's some kind of mechanism for our, be it our endocrine system, our brain, to communicate with some external AI?
Right. No, the document suggests any number of these kinds of possibilities. And so we're in a situation where, the general public looks at these kinds of things as if it's still science fiction, or something that only happens in university laboratories, but is still far off. But, we already see, for example, people trying to come up with technologies that are sort of analyzing your facial expressions or surveilling us in various other ways. We know that our choices are being monitored, our preferences are being kept track of, and so it's exactly what kind of technologies are going to be used are not particularly specified. And, but what's clear is that they've got an idea that this is going to happen. The thing that really got me paying attention was the fact that it's sort of like the decisions have already been made. The future is going to look something like this. There is going to be some way in which your biology is going to be connected to technology. There's going to be ways in which it informs you and you inform it, and it's going to be depended upon for you to make your everyday ordinary decisions. And right, that it's not really left up to Canadians to decide whether or not they even want to live like this. It's just assumed that it's going to be like this, and that powerful stakeholders are going to be the ones that are going to be making decisions about what technology it's going to be, or what platform, or what app, or what kind of intervention.
And what kind of stakeholder would be interested in something like this?
any kind of large business or technology company or biotech company.
That is interested in selling like data points and really understanding or how to drive different desires or capitalize on a populace, I suppose.
Right. I mean, one of the things is it's sort of these technologies are presented as if they're going to make it so that we make smart choices. But it's clear that it looks like that what choices are the smart choices are the ones that have already been decided for us, and we'll find happiness by making the choices that are recommended to us.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. We're going to pick this up in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're discussing biodigital convergence with Dr. Travis Smith, Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at Concordia. Dr. Smith, prior to the commercial break, we were discussing, why certain stakeholders might be interested in how we as humans could be influenced and how all this data that could be collected could be used to influence our decisions, and why that would be perhaps a very lucrative or interesting thing. The fact that this is being discussed on a Government of Canada website is somewhat concerning to me and probably many of our viewers. So I guess one question I'd like to know is are there any countries, are there any nation states globally that have something like this already?
I'm afraid actively implemented in place right now. I'm not sure what to say. It seems to me that in the past year or so, with the implementation of things like the vaccine certificate passports, that they've moved in the direction of getting people to get used to the idea that you surrender your bodily autonomy in order to have some of your freedoms returned to you. And that people just take this as now a given and it's normal, and even celebrate it, and we're excited for it and encourage other people to do it. And that concerns me when the initial buy-in to these kinds of technologies is the one that just gets people to agree to surrendering their bodily autonomy from the get-go.
Right.
And then tells people that, you have to comply if you want to be able to live a human life, if you want to be able to socialize, if you want to be able to buy or sell, if you want to, have a job, then you need to, follow whatever procedures the government requires of you. Take whatever medications it says you need to for the common good or for your own good. And it's just concerning to me that this kind of technology spread across the world, the developed world, so fast, and people agreed to it so readily. It just sort of I put it in the context of just how things have changed since my youth regarding attitudes toward technologies and our bodies. I think if you'll forgive me, Tanya, I'll make a popular culture reference here.
Go ahead.
When I was young, I grew up on Star Wars, and one of my favorite lines in Star Wars is when Obi-Wan Kenobi first tells Luke Skywalker about Darth Vader, and he says, he's more machine than man now, twisted and evil. And in the 1970s, we didn't need to be told that being more machine than man was twisted and evil. That was kind of something you could infer. And when the Star Trek introduced the Borg, that has this body biological technological combination, we knew from the first time we saw them on screen that these were the bad guys.
Right.
But something's changed in the last decade, and popular culture reflects that. And for example, the kinds of heroes in our movies today are like Tony Stark as Iron Man, who's gone full post-human. And we all just wonder, when are we going to get to have all the cool technologies and combine our bodies with these computers and implant technological devices in our bodies the same way the greatest superheroes on our screens today? Why don't we have that? It's sort of like the new version of Where's My Jetpack?
Right.
But the readiness with which people were convinced to agree that my bodily autonomy doesn't matter so long as I get to go and get some appetizers at a restaurant or go to the hockey game. That's cool.
Right. And I agree with you. And I think that comment has been said, and we should underscore it. That what is the trade-off? What are you trading and what are you getting? So for many people, you're right. It was, okay, I will get this vaccine. Maybe they didn't want to initially, but they did. Then they will upload their personal healthcare information to some kind of app, which hopefully is secure. It wasn't always, we know that. And then there's going to be a QR code generated. And because of that, like you said, I could then go and have an appetizer at a restaurant or go to this concert. what is the trade-off? And I think what you're suggesting, and what we've had guests on, privacy lawyers and all sorts on the show before, they're saying it's not worth it. Your privacy is worth something a lot more. Why are you surrendering it so easily and so quickly?
And right, it's the it's not only what other kinds of medications might you need to take in order to keep a green check mark instead of getting a red X on your screen. But what other kinds of, once you've agreed to that being an okay relationship between citizens and their governments, governments are apt to exploit that. We should always assume that any way in which a new power you give the government might be abused, that it will be abused. That should be our assumption. We have a moral obligation to make that assumption.
Right.
But once we've given them the idea that they can decide what we're permitted and not permitted to do on the basis of our compliance with this or that, if they're able to connect it to any other social good. You mentioned issues of security. So if we start having very serious cybersecurity issues, what will be the next step? What will be the next technological innovation that you'll have to comply with in order to be able to remain, green checked rather than red X'd?
Right.
And so
We've got to pause it there. I'm sorry, I know you want to finish the thought. We've got to cut to commercial. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're picking up our discussion on biodigital convergence. Dr. Smith, just before commercial break, you wanted to say some point. Go ahead, please.
Sure. I was just going to say, if it were the case that they were to tell us that in order for there to be a greater degree of security, that we actually had to, have some sort of microchip or whatever version of, nanotechnology incorporated into our bodies, which is the kind of thing that this document just predicts outright is going to be the case. Canadians are going to have to deal with this. The only question is, what are the impacts of it going to be for us socially, economically, and so forth.
Right.
Is that, what we've learned is that if they decide that they want to do that to us, we already know what kind of arguments are going to be made. It's going to be, well, if you don't get your microchip, then you're endangering the rest of us. Don't you know that our microchips don't work properly unless everybody gets their microchips? Or if some other technology comes along and they do say, well, this one actually does change your DNA, we're going to improve your health, or we're going to improve public health in some way that involves these kinds of more severe interventions than the ones that we've been used to in the last year. People are going to say, well, what's so special about your DNA? Don't you know that, getting your DNA is necessary in order to protect everybody else? Or, you're endangering other people by continuing to cling to your old-fashioned, outmoded, merely human DNA. And so it seems to me the script's already been written, and we've already been put through the motions, and our consent's already been given in principle to an awful lot of things that are more, further down the road that we didn't necessarily realize. Once we have agreed in principle to a certain kind of argument, or once we've agreed in principle to a certain kind of moral claim or a certain kind of use of government authority, then our ability to say, well, no to the next one is already compromised by the fact that we were so quick and ready to say yes to the previous one.
Right. It's almost we've become so normalized and desensitized to this handing over and participation in this. I mentioned earlier if there are any other nations where they have something similar. I know in communist China, they have like the social credit system. And so many of us in the West, when this was first spoken of, were horrified that we would couldn't have fathomed having something like this. My concern when I saw the QR codes, when I saw the uploading, the declaration at your workplace, what your private health status was, it was alarming for me because I could sort of see down the path, well, the government is trying to kind of insert ourselves sort of a little bit like what we see over in communist China, and that was alarming for me. But when
we saw in Ottawa very recently the very quickness with which the government was ready to, freeze people's financial assets on the basis of the allegation that they had contributed to some kind of equivalent, extremists or terrorists or something. That principle is terrifying to me. The idea that is now apparently now it's normal that if the government declares an emergency, they can freeze your assets. And so if that's declared normal on one basis, on what further basis could that same kind of action be taken if you were declared to be, unsafe or a risk or a danger We know that they're going to be implementing censorship laws if they have their way.
Correct.
And so, if will your assets be frozen if you tweet something that's impolitic? I was sort of flabbergasted that this was something that the step they were so ready to take so quickly, and there's been so little, public concern, generally speaking, over the precedent that it sets.
So knowing that so many Canadians participated, in the QR codes and in all of this, and to some degree, a large quantity of Canadians were okay with the freezing of the assets, for example, in the convoy. You brought up that example. We only have about 30 seconds. Is then biodigital convergence inevitable? Is this basically the future? Just how far out we don't know? Are we
I don't.
and are we going to be seen as Luddites if we oppose this technology or exacerbate? Like, are we going to be excluded from society?
Yeah, I don't like the language of inevitable because I prefer the language of freedom, and they're exclusive. The language of inevitable is the language of necessity, and the language of necessity treats human beings like slaves, not like free people. And so, insofar as Canadians remain a free people concerned about living as equals, living in a fashion that's consistent with human dignity, I don't like the language of inevitability, and I reject it out of hand.
Okay, well, hopefully we will definitely keep our eyes on this topic. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today, Dr. Smith.
Thank you for having me on Counterpoint today, Tanya.
Thank you. Biodigital convergence. What a fascinating topic. Sounds so futuristic, but if it's on a government website, it could be coming closer and sooner than we think. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick Allen.